everybody. My name is Lee Asher. I am the president of 52 Plus Joker, and I want to welcome you to our virtual playing card convention. Can I get some ones in the chat room right there? Let me see some ones. For those of you who are just joining us, you're wondering, what are these ones? What is he talking about? Well, you can see and you can hear me, but I cannot see and hear you. So in order for me to know that you're alive and you're participating and you can hear what we're doing and you love what we're doing, or even if you hate what we're doing, that lets us know that you are alive. So put some ones in the chat. Let me see those ones. I want to see them flying. There we go. There we go. Okay. Well, we've gotten to the part of the day where we have our next speaker. And this one is a doozy. They've all been doozies. This one is a doozy. Our next lecture has a special place in my heart. Jason McKinstry writes for Card Culture every month. 60 days ago, when the board made the decision to go virtual, I called Jason and I asked him if he would please write 3 months worth of articles for me in less than a month. Now look, it takes him about a month to craft his articles. If you read them, they're gorgeous, they're incredibly researched, they're thorough, wonderful. And here I am asking him to turn in 3 in 3 weeks. Well, he didn't disappoint. He most certainly did. And as a matter of fact, he gave me 4 articles. That's how awesome this guy is. Not only that, but he prepared a lecture for us that is going to blow your mind. If you don't know Jason McKinstry, he's an astute researcher and a playing card historian. He likes to unearth outstanding facts about original American playing card manufacturers that have been buried for centuries. Without a doubt, his finds would have made Tom Dawson and Eugene Hochman proud. Now it's our turn. Let's show some extra love for what he's done to prepare for this by hitting all those ones in the chats. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the world empires.
Hey guys, welcome to the real world of Paper Empires. I'm antique playing card collector and author of Paper Empires, Jason McKinstry. Thank you all for coming to this year's digital convention. This would have been my first convention and I was looking forward to meeting a lot of you guys out there in person. But I suppose if this was any other year, we would be giving this lecture to you guys in the conference hall to only a few of you, so I guess you could say that this new format's given us speakers a unique opportunity to reach out to all of you, whoever you are, wherever you are, in this new and digital way, and that's pretty cool. So today I'm going to be talking to you about antique playing cards and the role that they played throughout American history. I'll start by saying that this is an incredible story and it touches on almost everything that you can imagine. You know, it's taken many years and many generations to allow me to bring the story to you. For the last 40 years, the most prominent names in our community have been researching antique and vintage playing cards and basically establishing order in our world. Many people have dedicated their lives to the study of these tiny treasures behind me here. My role in all this has been to add the literal history that surrounds our playing card makers. In other words, to tell the incredible story about how this early playing card industry happened and to introduce the world to these men, businesses, and families, you know. Basically, I write the biographies of the playing card makers, as you guys all know. But how did I become able to study the history of these pioneering businessmen? Well, basically by collecting all these playing cards that you see behind me right here. That put me in a pretty good place to fully understand what these companies meant and how important they were to American history. But the cards themselves, they were only a part of the story. The dynamic nature of the country through those early years and the sheer immensity of the early industry are another. But for me, the heart of the story lies in the lives of the individuals, the companies, their families, their struggles, and their triumphs. That's what the story is really about for me. But before we can get started, let me ask you a question. Can you personally imagine a world where you didn't know who Henry Ford was, or Samuel Colt, or the Rockefellers, or the Winchester family? I would assume that you couldn't, and I can't really either. Why is that? Because it's in our nature to seek out the answers to these questions, to find out the truths behind the things that we love and use and the things that we find are important to us. You know, imagine my surprise when I found out that no one in the regular world knew who the early playing card makers were. To me, it was a world basically where nobody knew who Henry Ford was. What happened there? You know, was it because playing cards seemed so insignificant? Was it because something snuffed them out? Maybe it was simply because playing cards had traveled so closely with our civilization that we sort of forgot to remember about them. But in any case, In order to get you ready to learn about the playing card manufacturers, we need to go right to the first thing that captivated my mind, which is the playing cards themselves, right? As you can see here, I own more than a few decks of cards, right? But what's really in this office is a near complete telling of all the decks of cards that were offered from 1835 to 1935. This is the era that's considered the golden era of playing cards, and it was a time when the U.S. saw the biggest and the longest lasting playing card companies formed. The golden age was a century of innovation, art, invention, with breakthroughs in playing card technology happening all the time. So far my research has covered the big 7 manufacturers. These 7 manufacturers were the big engines running this economic giant. Because everybody back then owned a deck of playing cards and was replacing that deck of playing cards on a regular basis. This made playing cards really important to the financial landscape of America during those early years, L.I. Cohen, he was a pioneer in the early industry. In 1835, he invented a machine that would change playing card and printing history forever. It was called the four-color printing press, and that new tool allowed him a massive edge against his already somewhat limited competition. You can see there wasn't many playing card makers back then. An invention like what he made could propel him ahead of the competition for many years, which was indeed the case for L.I. Cohen. And it was also true for his other family-related businesses that were spawned after him. But anyway, let's maybe move over to camera number 2, and we'll have a look at some of those playing cards over here right now.
These decks do an amazing job of showcasing Cohen's printing press. Before decks like Cohen's on the right here, cards were mostly made by hand like this Krehor on the left. Krehor's cards were made using a simple printing press that would produce the base outlining, then workers would set out using stencils and brushes to apply the various colors. These brush strokes and stenciling outlines are clearly visible on this Krehor deck. This was a time-consuming and expensive process that was all but eliminated by Cohen's new machine. Now decks of cards were flying out of the factory faster and better looking than ever before, just like this L.I. Cohen deck from 1840.
Cohen didn't accomplish all these high watermark goals all by himself either. He had skilled help through the many family members that he employed at both his stationery store and his playing card factory. Whether born in or married in, Cohen was instrumental in raising some of the 1850s most prominent playing card makers. Of course, Lawrence and Cohen was the future extension of L.I. Cohen's playing card company. This was run by Lewis's son, Solomon Cohen, and his business partner, John M. Lawrence, another man who was married into the family. John J. Levy got his start working with his uncle Cohen with his sister Julia before he started his own playing card company. Perhaps you're familiar with famous Wild West Pharaoh card maker Samuel Hart. He married John J. Levy's sister, whom he met while working for Cohen in New York. Eventually, Hart and Julia moved to Hart's hometown of Philadelphia and ran L.I. Cohen's business interest there before going out on his own and becoming one of the most famous playing card makers in the entire world. So, as you can see, this was quite the family effort. Throughout the 1850s and 60s, this group of makers were constantly evolving and fighting off minor upstart card companies. While this was true, another maker was looming very large in the background, casting a shadow over all of their collective success. This man was Andrew Doherty. Doherty was more or less a completely self-made man, and he rose his empire battling it out at first for supremacy in New York, then the country, and then ultimately the whole world. You see, not many manufacturers could match the artistic qualities of Andrew Doherty. His work shows why so many Americans switched over to his playing cards above all others in the 1870s and beyond. While the others were tethered to the old world, in a way, Doherty was able to spread his wings and fly, much like the intricate eagles that he used on his playing cards. See this near-perfect engraving of the eagle? Far beyond what anyone else was offering in 1864. You can have a look for yourself and see the difference. It's pretty clear. Now, Samuel Hart gave Andrew Doherty the biggest run for his money out of all of his contemporaries. Hart's Pharaoh cards became forever connected to the Wild West in 1849 and throughout the period of westward expansion that immediately followed. Because Pharaoh was the game of choice to pass the time, there was plenty of cash flowing to keep these tables busy. Hart's famous linen eagles reigned supreme across this rugged and untamed landscape. Even with the popularity of those linen eagles, Hart, Levy, and Lawrence and Cohen ended up joining forces in 1873 to form the New York Consolidated Card Company. This was an important moment in playing card history because together they were able to keep Andrew Doherty at bay. But more importantly, this creative combination created some of the most beautiful decks that America had ever seen. Many of these early NYCC decks can be seen as a move in the right artistic direction. This newfound life propelled these men to victory over Andrew Doherty at the 1878 Paris Exposition. So let's talk about location for a minute. Notice anything about all these cards I've shown you so far? Most of them were made in New York. The fact is, New York housed so many of the playing card manufacturers that it became the epicenter of the entire industry. From the 1820s all the way until the 1890s, New York was simply the king. Just at a quick glance, we could have seen Caleb Bartlett, L.I. Cohen, Andrew Doherty, John J. Levy in the Union Card Manufactory, Lawrence and Cohen was there, and so were many smaller upstart companies that would come and go in this area. Now, not all cards were made in New York. Crehor and Ford were over in the Boston area, in a small town called Dorchester, Massachusetts. Samuel Hart put Philadelphia on the map and manufactured there for the better part of his career. Cincinnati first gains a reputation as home of the Longley brothers in the 1860s, and later becomes extremely well known after Russell and Morgan begin making their world-famous playing cards in 1881. It's ironic in a way because all of the circles of rivalry in New York, which were very intense, wouldn't matter in the end once the United States Playing Card Company got big enough to start eating up all of those companies one by one. It was playing card destiny, as they say, for Robert J. Morgan and Anthony O. Russell. When they arrived on the scene in late 1881, they began making waves right away. By this point in time, playing cards had already gone through 70 years of constant improvement. In other words, playing cards in 1881 basically looked identical to what we use today. All of those features were already there. What did this mean exactly? It meant that the United States Playing Card Company could focus exclusively on branding, which is also what they did the best. They branded every deck of cards in their lineup perfectly, and they also marketed those brands perfectly, slipping each one right into an area that would be eager to accept them. Let me ask you another question. Can you imagine a world without bicycle playing cards? Bicycle's a perfect example of the United States Playing Card Company's uncanny ability to tap into social consciousness and literally pull a rabbit out of a hat. The bicycle brand began in 1885, and it was in essence made to reflect America's very real fascination with actual bicycles.
Starting with the high wheel bicycle, or penny farthing, which had come over from England, the high wheel bicycle was only the beginning of this fascination, because like the history of playing cards, bicycles had a period of rapid improvement and innovation as well. The United States Playing Card Company's bicycle brand would follow these changes closely with their playing cards.
Although we're all familiar with the bicycle brand, that wasn't how it began for the United States Playing Card Company. When Russell and Morgan began making playing cards in 1881, they were interested in creating a series of core brands that would satisfy a handful of already established markets. They settled on 5 decks that would span those markets perfectly: Tigers 101, Sportsman 202, Army 303, Navy 303, and Congress 404. The Tigers were the lowest quality option, and they were made originally to compete with other manufacturers' steamboat decks. Of course, we know that within only a few years, the United States Playing Card Company began offering steamboat decks too. It's interesting to note that the Tigers had already gained their own popularity, and they were also kept in the fold. Sportsman cards were a step up in quality, and they would feature back styles of hunting and animal motifs. All major manufacturers at the time were producing a sporting style card, so only a natural section of the market to play into. Russell and Morgan's Army and Navy cards were an instant hit within the ranks of the military, and originally they were made as 2 separate brands that both fell under the number 303. This was changed over time, and the two were merged together to become an inclusive Army-Navy 303 brand. These decks were always high quality because they were subjected to the rigors of everyday life in the Army or Navy. The last official brand during the startup in 1881 was Congress 404. This was the highest quality card that the United States Playing Card Company offered, and it continued as one of the best quality cards throughout its long and illustrious history of entertaining card players across the United States.
If you look at all these United States Playing Card Company decks, what do they all have in common? If you guessed that they all use the same Ace of Spades design, you guessed right. The key to success for the U.S. Playing Card Company was the fact that there was a universal look throughout the lineup. It didn't matter what brand you had. When you saw the Statue of Freedom, you knew it was made by the USPC. Truthfully, they couldn't have picked a better symbol during that time. The construction of this real Statue of Freedom began in 1860 and was completed in 1863, with the final section being erected on December 2nd. Did you know that at the time of completion that there was a 35-gun salute? When Russell and Morgan started making cards, America had been watching the Statue of Liberty being constructed over in France. Large sections of Liberty were on display at the 1878 Paris Exposition, which of course was attended by some of our playing card makers. New York City saw Liberty rise in 1885, and the dedication ceremony took place in October of 1886. I guess we could say that this was a perfect time for this type of symbolic and beautiful American imagery. The proof of this success is shown through the fact that the United States Playing Card Company is still in business today, nearly 150 years later.
Now, like I told you, my job is to tell the story of all these manufacturers. I think now would be a great time to give you a little taste of the type of juicy material that I deal with on a daily basis. Just to start, I could mention Andrew Doherty and the fact that he was a good acquaintance of President Abraham Lincoln. During the time of the Civil War, Doherty had been lobbying for higher taxes on playing cards. This extra income would go directly to the war effort. Pleased with his contribution and to honor his noble friend, Lincoln invited Doherty to the White House. That's where Lincoln is quoted as saying, "It's citizens like you, Mr. Doherty, who make the liberty of the United States indestructible." Quite an honor from an extraordinary American president. The rally cry of the Civil War was felt by many of our playing card manufacturers. Another great example that comes to mind is the Longley brothers. The Longleys have an interesting and sordid tale throughout the history of playing cards, starting in 1861 when they made their first deck of cards. Before long, the brothers were swept up in the war effort in 1862. That very year, they began to manufacture many of the flags and regimental colors that were flown over the various battlefields of the Civil War. It might be hard to imagine that the flags of the Civil War were made by our playing card makers, but it's absolutely true. Our manufacturers were much more important to the history of the United States than they've ever been given credit for. I think that the more that we shed light on how amazing all of this really is, the more people are going to wake up to this big part of forgotten history. My book, Paper Empires, tells the first part of the story. It covers L.I. Cohen, Andrew Doherty, Samuel Hart, and John J. Levy. We get to meet them, their families. We get an inside look at the way that their businesses were structured. We get as near to the day-to-day life as humanly possible. You know, that's what I love the most about all the history that I research. It's the moments that make you look twice and think about how this affected things. Like the Great Fire in New York that took place in 1835. This fire was so enormous and it brushed only a few city blocks away from L.I. Cohen's William Street business. We're talking about a fire so big that it was seen as far away as Philadelphia. These are moments in time that you just know what a tragedy that this was for our playing card makers.
In fact, tragedy is a key part of many of the events that make the lives of our playing card companies interesting. After Abraham Lincoln was shot in 1865 by John Wilkes Booth, his body was taken on a funeral procession through many cities and towns. Some would be by rail and a slow-moving train would roll by, and for other larger cities there was a horse-drawn hearse that Lincoln would be brought in so that people could pay their final respects. On May 20th, 1865, this procession made it to Philadelphia. From what I know, almost every citizen was gathered there to see the coffin. Here's a picture from that momentous day. I've always wondered if Samuel Hart and his family were watching from somewhere in these crowds. I know Andrew Doherty did for sure in New York.
These are the things and ideas that I entertain. For me, the fact-by-fact history is only the beginning. The overlapping of the biographies against the backdrop of American history, that's where more sparks begin to fly. Take Ulysses S. Grant, for example, legendary general during the Civil War, and goes on to become President of the United States. Well, guess what? He has a direct connection to our playing card makers. Grant owned a deck of Samuel Hart playing cards that he used during many of the battles of the Civil War. This deck was passed down through his estate and ended up with some of his other personal belongings that were donated to a museum. This is no surprise to me, though. I know who was making the cards, and it's a foregone conclusion that all the events in history that involve playing cards actually involve our makers specifically.
Take Wild Bill Hickok and the immortal tale of the Dead Man's Hand for another example. Out in Deadwood in 1876, the year that Wild Bill was shot, the game of choice was still faro, but poker was coming up really fast on its heels. Hickok was playing poker that fateful day as he sat there holding the hand that was about to be forever tied to his name.
The question for me, and as always, Who made the cards that he was holding? Given the fact that Pharaoh was still in full swing, I'd say Bill was using a deck of Samuel Hart playing cards. Most people think that he would have been using Pharaoh cards during this game, but I'm here to say that this is more than likely not the case. Poker cards were readily available and had been used for over a decade by then. Poker cards were a totally different card than Pharaoh cards and employed a lot of the features of improvement like round corners, indicators, thinner stock, and higher finish. Truthfully, in 1876, not all cards performed the same way. Pharaoh as a game was 20 years older than poker at that time, so the accepted playing cards were actually older to begin with. Let's have a look at some of the Samuel Hart Pharaoh cards from around that time. Pharaoh cards were thick, square-edged, and without corner indicators. Not built for poker per se, but absolutely perfect for Pharaoh. You see, in the early years of the NYCC, they were relying on Samuel Hart and his international reputation to sell cards. Hart was the most successful of all the companies that were operating for the 20 years prior. So NYCC put his name on a lot of the cards that they made. Their Pharaoh cards were made by Hart, their poker cards were made by Hart, the highest end George and Martha Washington cards were made by Hart, the lowest end steamboats were made by Hart. They were right to do this. Samuel Hart was an American legend by the 1870s.
So out of all the decks out there, which one do I think Wild Bill was using the day that he became famous for the last time in Saloon Number 10 in Deadwood? I'd say this one, NY49. It's a poker deck through and through, and one of the best available at the time. If the saloon was ordering Samuel Hart Pharaoh cards from the NYCC, then this deck was being advertised and available to them as well.
The West gets even wilder when playing cards get involved. Because so many great stories come with playing cards baked right in, this automatically becomes our playground. For me though, I like to still make sure that all the facts are straight before getting into any type of speculation.
With antique playing cards, we're so close to the action that we're actually in the center of it. If we left South Dakota and headed down to Arizona in 1880, we would find Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson dealing Pharaoh at the Oriental Saloon in Tombstone. Wyatt Earp and his whole group loved to gamble, and during the early years of Tombstone, Wyatt was making a 25% take on the Pharaoh table's profits. That's a really generous share.
As you can see, the influence of the early playing card industry truly spreads from sea to sea. It's a story that encompasses every moment in America, and by using the playing cards, we can start to see that the history of playing cards and the history of the United States are actually one and the same. Well, I'm running out of time for now, but before I go, I want to tell you that there's a lot more incredible content coming your way. If you don't have my first book, Paper Empires Volume 1, get it now before Volume 2 comes out. Don't forget that I write monthly for Card Culture magazine. Every month through Collector's Corner, we look at a new and unusual side of the world of playing card history. I'm working on my 24th edition right now. It's honestly been an epic 2 years. Speaking of Collector's Corner, my first annual is also out right now, so be sure to pick that up. It's all 12 Collector's Corner articles from 2019, plus a bonus 2. Another very cool thing that I'm working on is a new video series. It's called Unboxing the World of Paper Empires. And in there, we're going to literally unbox some of the greatest decks of all time and give them the royal treatment. Because we're dealing with playing cards that are hundreds of years old, we have to do things a little bit differently. I have the ultimate unboxing box that I will share with you right now. This little baby right here holds the most iconic deck of playing cards ever made. The deck that's in here is so important to American history that I simply don't have the time to talk to you about it here. Soon you'll be able to watch me open this box and reveal the secret. Join me in taking playing card history to the next level. Visit my website at worldofpaperempires.com and learn everything about the unboxing. The website is your gateway to all things Paper Empires. Hey, I'll see you guys later for now, but I'll be back for the live question and answer. But until then, thanks for hanging out with me and hearing about some of these great US stories and looking at some of these incredible playing cards. You guys are going to really love all of this.
Hit those ones, stand to your feet. I'm speechless, Jason. This was an incredible lecture. People did not want it. And if you look at the chat room, they're screaming, more, encore. Thank you. Thank you so much for putting the energy and research and time and love into this presentation. My God, it was fantastic, Jason. Thank you.